We are live. We're just waiting for everyone to come on board. Lovely to have you all with us, but just wait a couple of more minutes and we'll have a few more people are joining us just as we're speaking. Okay, don't want to take up too much of your time. So hello, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Lovely to see you and know that you are all there today. Thank you for joining us from all around the country and for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to join us for the next 45 minutes. I am Kati Gapayara, I'm the CEO of the Fathering Project, and I'm delighted to be hosting all of you today. In celebration of International Men's Day coming up in a few weeks' time, today's session really is focusing on understanding and addressing men's work stresses. And this will be led by clinical psychologist, Dr. James Brown. At the end of the session, there will be a live Q&A. If you have any questions for our panelists who I'm about to introduce in a second, please put them in the chat box and we will come to them at the end and we will attempt to answer as many questions as we possibly can in the time that we have. So just before I introduce you to our panelists, I wanted to give you a very brief overview of the Fathering Project and the work that we do in supporting the community. You may know that we are celebrating our 10th year here of existence, and we are a community-centric program stepping in early to provide evidence-based support to children and men who are dads. We provide that support through schools, through community organizations and corporates, and we are making a significant difference in their lives and reducing demand for high-intensity and crisis services in the future. We know there is a big appetite for workplaces to support families, and of course, men are a big part of that picture. And workplaces also want to promote equal caregiving, of course, and we look forward to supporting and making a difference in many more workplaces. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our two amazing panelists today. A big welcome to Dr. James Brown. James is a registered clinical psychologist and has been working in organizations and private practice for 18 years. He has a particular interest in assisting men with their psychological health and well-being. His PhD investigated the importance of relationship closeness between fathers and their children and barriers to father involvement. James currently serves as a non-executive director on the board of the Fathering Project, and we're very grateful for his guidance in our clinical and community services work. His specialization in men's mental health provides a really deep understanding for us of the challenges and the strategies for well-being within male-dominated work environments. So we're really grateful to have him here today with us. James, a big welcome to you.
Thanks for letting me participate. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And also joining us today is Kym Murphy, General Manager at RoadTek, Queensland Transport and Main Roads. Thank you, Kym, for joining us today in what must be a very busy time for you leading up to Christmas and the break. Kym leads and provides strategic direction to RoadTek and brings with her a wealth of experience and insight into the unique stresses that men face in the workplace, and will talk to us about the innovative ways in which they are working to support their employees. She is also the proud mum of 3 independent and resilient young men who must be very happy to have her as their mum. Kym, a big welcome to you today.
Thanks, Kati. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you so much. Now, our lovely participants, I know you're all very keen for us to get started, as am I. So I will now pass over to James to give us a presentation on men's stresses in the workplace.
I'll share my screen. So I just checked that I'm being heard and that you can see my slide presentations up there before I get going. So are we all good to go, Kati?
We are great to go. Thank you very much, James.
Right, thank you. So I appreciate this opportunity, and not only other than all of those introductions around my career, I'd also like to mention importantly that I'm a father of 4, and appreciative also to my wife, Michelle, 25 years of marriage this year, in sharing that journey together in raising our kids. I'd like to actually use the case study to introduce what I'd like to talk about today. I'd like to use Rob as a way of considering the elements that I'd like to work through and speak to, particularly the many leaders that are joining us on this webinar. Now, imagine this morning, it was a number of times that I'd seen Rob, but he arrived at our session this one particular time, a little late, a little hurried, and looking very, very tired. And as he sunk into the cushions on the chair, he let out an exasperated sigh, as if he hadn't rested in months. I then did my usual check-ins as to how he was doing with his health and well-being, his work, his family, and he was very flat in all of his responses. And I noticed that he was incredibly distracted. His mind seemed to be somewhere else. I allowed Rob to just take some time to just pause and collect himself before he then responded, "No one ever told me how hard this would be." After a few more moments of silence, Rob's flatness turned to tears welling in his eyes, and a real sense of overwhelm filled the room. I reassured Rob that yes, it's hard, but we can help him to get through this time together. Rob, for me, represents many of the men that I've worked with over the years, many of the fathers that I've assisted, in that they are going through an incredible period of adjustment in our society. Like Rob, he's often feeling unprepared and overwhelmed for the roles that he's been asked to play, often not sleeping well, having difficulty concentrating at work, and feeling very isolated in his experiences. We know that men like Rob, particularly in that early period of parenting, often are experiencing postnatal depression, but they are slipping through the cracks of our health system, and they are turning up at our workplaces like yours in need of support. These changes that have been going on in our society for more than 50 years have resulted in the expectations around men's roles from shifting from a primary breadwinner, often seen as aloof and distant to their children, to a more involved and available carer of children while still also being a provider. And it's referred to as a modified breadwinner. In other words, we haven't really quite got there yet in terms of reaching a point of real equity in the homes, in sharing care and work and providing for families. So today's fathers are actually experiencing a striking paradox where they're being expected to be more hands-on and involved, yet they're not experiencing the systemic changes in their working lives to accommodate for that. And this results in something that we know in the literature as being work-family conflict. And we know that there are linkages to this phenomenon and the experience of mental health difficulties. And so this is the context for which I'd like to have you consider people like Rob in your workplace, fathers like Rob that are having some difficulties that you might be picking up on, and what we can do to help them to improve their mental health, but also to function better in their roles. Now, in terms of this idea of work-family conflict, we know that, first of all, it's possible that Rob might be diagnosed with something like major depression, okay? But that's a medical term. If we look underneath it, the reasons for why he's struggling become more obvious. We start to see that he's experiencing high work-family conflict. Now, this is the result of seemingly competing demands such as job demands and childcare. And the seemingly incompatibility of these demands place psychological tension and distress. There is also a real or perceived lack of resources to adequately meet the demands of both. And this results in that sense that many of you might relate to, where you feel like you're missing out on important responsibilities in your home life, but not meeting the demands or expectations at work either. And that resultant sense of distress can lead to some of the psychological terms that we often talk about, like anxiety and depression for men in the workplace. And we see signs of things like exhaustion, lack of energy, and distractibility is a key one that a lot of people, I know clinically, are reporting a lot at the moment, feeling like they're in one place but not able to attend to those things because their mind is elsewhere. And so for particularly the fathers that I'd have you consider today, this for many of them is a new experience. Many working mothers can relate to this because it's been something that they've been experiencing for decades. But for a lot of the men in our workplaces, this is new territory for them, and they lack role models as to how to deal with these things. Now, we often hear in the media reports about studies about the rates of anxiety and depression in our society. It's about 1 in 8 men in our society that will experience a depressive illness in their lifetime, and about 1 in 5 men that will experience an anxiety disorder. But what's really interesting is to have a look at why. What's the cause of that? And an interesting study by Zach Ziedler and his colleagues at the Movember Foundation, they actually did a study where they found the common reasons that men are seeking help. And it's got something to do with what we've just talked about, which is this work-family conflict. Because it was found that majority of adult men that seek mental health services seek it because of difficulties with family, relationships, and work. So the things that I've just mentioned are showing up in clinical settings. And so therefore it comes to us to consider what workplaces might be able to do to address this issue, because there's certainly a lot that can be done. A study that was done by the Australian Institute of Family Studies actually looked at a group of fathers, about 3,500 of them, and they found that about 55% of them were working more than 50 hours a week. And that's before they start doing some of the tasks that they're being asked to do and want to do in their homes. And so this is an example of that high work-family conflict scenario that I was mentioning. But what's interesting about this study is that they do follow-ups with this group of fathers every 5 years. And what they found is that those fathers that were experiencing high work-family conflict, who resolved that over time through whatever changes that might have been, showed a significant improvement in their mental health as a result. So it's definitely a key contributing factor to fathers and men's mental health that we need to be attuned to. So this is an important link that I'd like to bring your attention to, and have you then consider some things that we can do in our organisations and in our workplaces. Okay, so what can organisations do to help? Well, importantly, there's actually been a lot done in this space. So I'd like to actually, in many ways, bring your attention to some things if you haven't, or if you have, to remind you of some things. So in terms of the international space, there's been some important reports written over the last 5 years about the role of workplaces and organisations in promoting positive mental health. One in particular was the US Surgeon General's report, which was actually quite groundbreaking in terms of what it's spoken about in contrast to previous notions. This quote I love, which is, workplaces can be the engines of mental health and well-being. So seeing that organizations can actually be drivers of change and promoting well-being in our society. In Australia, I'm sure many of you are aware that in the last few years, organisations' attention has been brought to legislative changes federally and at state levels around providing psychosocial safety in the workplace. And so those documents and surrounding literature actually speak to what it is that we can do about this. In other words, the maths and the science has already been done. And I particularly appreciate a report last year by the Centre of Economic Development Australia that brought together a lot of this research into a document that helps us to see where we can best spend our time and our money. So if you wish to look up this report, if you haven't come across it, I highly recommend it. This is the name of the report. And this is an important summary matrix that I think is really helpful and speaks for itself. If we look across this matrix, first of all, to the left, we can see that there are things that organizations have been trying for years or spending money on that actually aren't delivering the effective results that we would hope to see. And we need to start acknowledging that and owning that. You would have thought that a clinical psychologist would want to speak to you today about mindfulness meditation and yoga classes at work, etc. Now, as much as they are wonderful things and more in a clinical setting might be helpful, in an organization, I'd be more turning your attention to the right of the matrix. As you can see, as highlighted in this color coding, it's things like job redesign, improving the leadership culture, supporting things like peer support programs. These are the sorts of things that can really bring about great change in workplaces in helping them to be more supportive of psychosocial well-being. I'd like to now speak about some of these things, especially in relation to the cohort that I'm mostly thinking of today, which is fathers in your workplaces. So I've mentioned job design, and I hope you can appreciate I don't have the time to unpack that, but only to note that as being one of the big hitters there in that particular report. I'd like to bring your attention to the things that we can do about mental health support, and note that supportive leadership comes up time and time again in studies as to what employees say make a big difference in them feeling that their mental health and well-being is important in their workplace. So certainly supportive leaders can do a lot in this space to promote psychological safety and well-being, and they can certainly do a lot to role model positive actions like self-care and making it comfortable in workplaces to talk about these matters, to talk about how our lives outside of work might be difficult sometimes and are impacting on our abilities at work and vice versa. That should be something that a supportive leader can make comfortable. I'd also like to make note of peer support programs and reference, of course, the work of the Fathering Project in doing activities in workplaces that certainly match this idea of creating a culture in workplaces of peers, let's say in this case, working families that can come together and support each other in their workplaces about the competing demands that they're having in their lives. Flexible work arrangements, I'm sure many of you are familiar with. The important thing that I'd like to make note of in reference to men and to fathers is that, first of all, flexible work arrangements are aimed at helping to lessen work-family conflict. So they're really aimed at helping to address this source of distress on people's mental health. The challenge for men in your workforce, as I'm sure you are aware of, is getting them to use them. And the best thing that I can say is that the research suggests that it is better that they be formalized than left to be informal or ad hoc, because when they are left to be by chance, they are unfortunately underutilized on a large scale, in fact, or misused. So as you think about these arrangements and these policies that you have, think about inviting a father to actively participate in a conversation with you about formalizing a flexible work arrangement so they can better manage their work and family life. I would also like to just briefly make note of paid parental leave. I've spoken about this topic at a couple of conferences, and it's a big topic to unpack, and I don't have opportunity to do that today, other than to make a point in reference to how it's helpful in terms of our topic area. What we know is that if men take up that option of paid parental leave because it's a good scheme, and if they spend that early period of time with their infant, they are going to learn a template of balancing better work and family roles that will survive and sustain them in their career. They are less likely to experience work-family conflict in their later career as a result. And we refer to this idea as a shadow effect. So something that has a small, seemingly insignificant effect in a small moment of time actually casts a virtuous shadow across time and has great benefit. And let's, of course, not forget benefits to the children and to their partners as well. So finally, I'd like to just spend a little bit of time ending with some commentary about stereotypes and stigmas about mental health, and of course, in reference to fathers in this audience and supporting them. You're going to hear a lot this month of November and with International Men's Day about men and masculinity and their health. And I'd like to ask you to just pause for a moment and consider that while elements of masculinity may be linked to reluctance to seek help in research, it is not true to say that it is all of the picture. of men's health. And we should be careful of the way we talk about men's mental health and thinking that it's attributable to this aspect. What actually is of concern is much of the problem has to do with how society responds to men in distress. As an example, going back to Rob, when he asked for some time to take care of an issue with one of his children, the response from his boss was, "Can't your wife take care of that?" Not only was that dismissive of his emotional experience and of his willingness to actually come forward and share that he was struggling with his manager, but it also reinforced a stereotype of his role being secondary to his wife's role as being primary carer. And we need to change that. It's going to take time, but certainly leaders can play a big part of that as the way that they respond to men and their distress and provide them empathic support and things that they can go away and do to improve their situation in managing their work and their family life can have a significant benefit. I'd also like to encourage leaders to think about how they might change stereotypes in thinking about fathers in their workplace as well. That when we can create a more visible, spotlighted approach to particularly young fathers taking time, let's say paid parental leave, to be there for their children, we do a lot to actually, in our culture, change this language, this vocabulary about men and about fathers and their importance to their children. And that helps to lessen that sense of conflict in men's minds about those competing demands, because they feel supported and they feel encouraged in the way that they're trying to go about managing their work life. A simple way of doing this might be similar to what we still do for many mothers heading off onto leave when they're about to have a child. We could also think as leaders of doing for something practically similar, a morning tea with some cash in an envelope or a gift, and encouraging that man as he heads off to enjoy that special time with his infant on paid parental leave. That can make a remarkable impact on them and certainly will transfer down the track over time. So I believe that I'm out of my time. And so I'd like to now leave you with a final quote that's been very influential to me, and that is that no success can compensate for failure in the home. We as a society need to remember that we are people that share multiple responsibilities, important responsibilities in our societies of parents, and that to be supported in those roles and to be successful in those roles is really important to all of our mental health. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, James. That was incredible. Loved your presentation and the expertise that you bring to this very topical issue, and hope that Rob is doing okay now. His story is such a typical one we see everywhere, and I think we can all relate to it as well in a more or less way. We can see that from your presentation that if organizations are genuinely seeking to improve employee well-being, it's crucial to really delve deeper and address the big systemic factors that contribute to poor mental health. As you mentioned, the well-being of people is not merely a checkbox. It's as you explained so well, and it's a dynamic, multi-dimensional concept, isn't it, that has to be addressed holistically. And band-aids and quick fixes are not sustainable solutions. So thank you so much for a very insightful presentation.
I'd muted myself, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And now what we'd love to do is to get thoughts from Kym, who is, on the ground managing, over 1,300 employees, many who are FIDO-DIDO workers, many who are men as well. Kym, we know you're a manager that really cares about your employees, and we'd love to hear your experience and what you're currently doing at RoadTek to support your teams. Can you give us an overview of the kind of industry that you work in and what you've seen firsthand when it comes to men's work stress?
Yes, Kady, thank you. And good morning to everyone. Actually, it's good afternoon, I think, in some people's places. I'm in Queensland, and so I'm still, with daylight saving, I'm still in the morning. But as RoadTek branch that I manage and lead, we're a commercial government business unit within the Queensland Department of Transport and Main Roads. And we provide the transport infrastructure solutions through integrated business streams, including civil construction and maintenance. We've got structures, we've got electrical, line marking, and digital infrastructure services. And this is all to enable the department to deliver on Queensland government priorities and community outcomes. So we are statewide, and we have a presence both in metropolitan. We've also got regional and remote areas, and we've got 29 depots and satellite locations dispersed across all of Queensland. As you said, Caddy, we have a workforce of around 1,350 employees, but we also have an additional 200 to 400 labour hiring contractors, depending on the fluctuating program of our work. So if I was to pick an industry, I suppose our predominant industry is civil construction, and very much that, just to be able to create that working context for those of you that are on this webinar. And with many of our regional and remote workers working away from home in camps and motels, generally on a fortnightly shift pattern, 10 on, 4 off, 11 days on, 3 days off, particularly in our remote areas like far north Queensland. So we also have folk on night rosters for responsive maintenance in southeast Queensland, and also call-outs for the regional operational unit. So many of our crews also are exposed, because we do work out there on our transport network. We are exposed to aggressive and really unsafe behaviours of the travelling public. And also our incident response crews are often responding to fatalities and other distressing traffic incidents. So when I work around all our different depots and I do yarn with our folk, some of the biggest sources of stress that I hear about from those people, particularly living away from home, from their families and their loved ones, and also those on night shift, and also those who are attending those traffic incidents where people have died or have been seriously injured. So you can only imagine how working away or being at night plays on the father's minds. And we heard a bit about that from Dr. James just before. Like, some of the questions that they ask themselves and talk to me about is like, how do they stay relevant in their kids' lives? How do their kids know that they love them and are there for them if they're not physically present? And also, and it was touched on before, like feeling guilty about that extra mental load and pressure on their spouse or their partner whilst they're not there. So like, how do they keep their relationship healthy with their partner and spouse, and also their communication loving and with no blame? So also another form of stress really is our people in RoadTek. They really care about one another. So often our folk are really just stressed about their workmates' mental health and well-being. I mean, it's lovely that they do watch out for their mates. However, it can take its own toll on them as well.
Thank you, Kym. And can I just ask a quick question of James about that secondary mention that you made, Kym, about the toll it takes on colleagues? So even if you are not impacted by the work stress, how much of a toll is that on colleagues, James, who are looking out for you and see your stress?
Yeah, it's been interesting to see. I'll actually point to one of the interventions that organisations have been implementing, known as peer support programs. And I think that's actually part of the reason why they've been so successful, but also popular. Because for a person that's in a workplace, such as we're just describing there, that are worried about their colleagues and worried about the effects of their work on their colleagues, as well as they know that it is on them, a peer support program is this meaningful action that as an employee, you can do something to help to be a part of a solution to that, and to create a sense of support in your organisation that actually, to many employees that I've seen be involved in the development of these programs, they actually feel very passionate about and a lot of ownership around that. So I think if I can use that as an example of an intervention that's helpful, but also the underlying reasons as to why it's popular and why it's being embraced by employees, is because that's the way that they can feel like they're making a difference around those sorts of issues.
Yeah, fantastic. And Kym, given this is a heavily male-dominated industry, as you have explained to us, and the men are, for long periods of time away from their families, but also in quite stressful situations while they're away, not just because they're away, but the work situation is stressful. Do you find that they generally keep to themselves and don't seek support, even if they are struggling?
Oh, Kadi, it's a mixed bag. I often hear of our men talking to one of their mates or their supervisor, but not often as a group, other than really to talk about footy or fishing. I am a big one to talk about mental health and the importance of reaching out if you're not okay, and that it's okay to not be okay. So that is something I'm really conscious of, having that really consistent message from me to our workforce. Whilst we often hear these days it's actually courageous to speak up and to be vulnerable, it's easier said than done, and particularly for our menfolk. As you mentioned before in the introduction, I have 3 sons in their early 20s, and particularly now they've all left home and off being amazing humans, it's been one of my deepest fears for them, that they know that they can still have that safe space and a loving ear from me when they're struggling or get into a bind. So despite an upbringing with family chats at the dinner table and all those lovely things that we get encouraged to be as young parents, they still feel that they need to show that coping face and work it out on their own. And I think this particularly is because they are my sons, and they are young men. I just pray that they have a close mate that they can open up to. Have fun with too, yes, but also share their fears and their thoughts when things are tough. So I suspect a lot of our men haven't had talking about their worries or emotions role modelled to them as they grew up. So maybe they just don't know how to, or even if they did want to. I certainly don't believe it's because men don't worry or feel out of depth with this parenting thing. I think it just seems to doesn't just come as naturally to talk about the not knowing. I think it's awesome to see how conversations do change, though, when one of the men in the crew or the team opens up and shares about their family or a story about a situation with their kid from the night before, for example. It often takes only that one person to show that vulnerability, and it almost seems to unlock the dam of stories. So it's lovely to witness that.
Yeah, it's difficult because men generally do take a while to open up to each other, and some hide their emotions and stress really well. So it can be difficult to identify. James, how can we identify some of these signs? So if you're in a situation where you can see sort of a mate is not well, but you're not really sure if they are or not, what are the telltale signs and what can we do about them?
I think the best way to describe it is that you can't generalize it, that it always looks like this or it always looks like that. What you've got to be thinking of is that if you help people to understand that we all have a bit of a baseline, the way that we operate. And if you're in a team, for example, if I'm a member of your team, you're going to get to know what my general way of operating is, what my mood is mostly like, what worries me or stresses me. You're going to get a general feel of my baseline. And what you're going to be concerned about is when I start to change in a way that's above that baseline or below that baseline. That's a better way of thinking about it, as opposed to there's a set list of things to look out for. So if I'm normally a bubbly person, but I withdraw, so in other words, my behavior tends to drop below my normal baseline, that would be a good indicator for a mate within my workplace to just ask if I'm doing all right. Do I need a chat? If I am normally baseline a fairly quiet guy, but in team meetings, I can become really agitated easily and I start to snap at somebody really quickly, that's a good indicator that I'm above my normal baseline, and my agitation might be indicating that something's going on. And so that would be the best way I could describe, to be mindful of us, each other in our workplaces. Look for things that indicate that somebody is either above or below, and use that as an opportunity to just have a chat. And if we can all do that more regularly, we'd really help people to just more regularly open up and share what's going on for them, and it can make a big difference.
And James, how would you introduce that chat? Because it's not always easy to go up to someone and say, hey, mate, are you all right?
Yeah, it's important to appreciate that we should never ambush somebody with a tough conversation, no matter what the topic is, right? And we're better to, if we do notice somebody and we are concerned about them, we're better to actually, first of all, make a suggestion of catching up. So if we approach them in the lunchroom or in the team room or wherever it might be, we might just have a little private moment with them to say, hey, can we grab coffee later today? And in that moment, as they're sitting in a more private setting, then use those good open questions to say, hey, I've noticed something, I'm concerned, how you going? And so that would be important. If you can appreciate, nobody likes to feel ambushed, nobody likes to feel cornered. And I'd say that's particularly true for men. If we appreciate that emotions and talking about things can be difficult, then we should try to give them the best chance to talk about anything that's tough that's going on in a good environment.
Thank you. That's very insightful advice on how to approach that. Kym, can I come back to you again and ask you what, given the context of the work that you have, male-dominated, lots of stress, lots of time away from home and family, and stresses in itself as well, what has been your response to this culture, and how have you implemented change to support your employees and especially the dads?
Yes, Kari. In a work environment, it's often difficult to find that time to have a yarn. And, and James just mentioned that about, coming up to someone saying, hey, do you want to have a bit of a chat or a bit of a coffee? And so everyone does feel that productivity and a strong work ethic is very important. And it is. But I'm also a firm believer that, a happy, motivated workplace and workforce is a more productive and innovative workforce. So I do think it's really incumbent on us as leaders to create that time and the space and even the permission for people to connect if they want to provide that mentally healthy workplace. I mean, we know men, particularly in the construction industry, we do have high rates of suicide, and we know how much their stress and anxiety and that mental health concerns relate to their family. So in RoadTek, we have partnered with the Fathering Project to pilot delivery of the Working Families program in our Far North operational unit up in Cairns. And I absolutely love this program as it encompasses all our employees who are parents and promotes that gender equality and equal caregiving responsibilities. It has been our intentional strategy to improve the mental health of our people, encouraging those more positive behaviours that they can bring to work, which in turn increases our productivity and influences how they do lead others. And because very much we know as we're bringing our whole self to work. So so how we're feeling, how relevant and valued we're feeling at home and as fathers or as parents, and what's going on in our private lives, that really does have a huge impact on how we show up at work. So our objective with this pilot is to particularly support our workers who are fathers or father figures to better manage and gain control of their work-life balance and improve their well-being. So I find that men and fathers are often not a focus in overall advancements of equity and well-being in workplaces. So we've made this really conscious decision. So this has been a wonderful opportunity to support our men specifically. We in RoadTek are working to break down that existing gender stereotypes and increase our workers' confidence to be engaged and proactive fathers, and also father figures. It's not everyone in our pilot program are fathers, but they're father figures. And bringing those positive impacts to their families and their workplaces. It's something I feel very strongly about, actually, and so I'm really excited to be part of that program and to bring that to our folk. And hopefully it'll be successful and we can roll that out throughout the state. Interestingly, another piece of work we are actually doing at the moment, like we're currently having this project on foot, looking in how we can improve our people's lived experiences when living in camps. And we haven't cracked it yet, and we're just starting and just engaging with some of our own folk and particularly our men folk, but women do live in the camps as well. We're wanting to ensure that both their physical and their psychosocial safety whilst they're living away from their loved ones. So the question has been, and that's what we're putting to each other and to our folk, is how do we create that sense of community and that connection whilst we're within the amenity of the camp? And so it's not just this row of dongers as often we see, on the TV or whatever, but also that, that space to relax and to be yourselves and to engage with one another and to have some more healthy activities when we are living away from home. So that's something else that that we're doing. As I said, we haven't cracked it yet, but it's certainly another thing that's really important to us and for all our employees' experience when they're working with us in RoadTek.
That's amazing. What you've just outlined is supportive leadership, which is exactly what James was talking about earlier. So, leadership sets the tone for the organization, and it sounds like you're doing exactly that at RoadTek, which is great. Lucky ducks who are working for RoadTek. You are running the Working Families program, I know, and of course, we're looking forward to finding out how that is working with the group as well. And then we're going to, I think, emanate from that our dads groups, which are peer-to-peer support groups as well. So that's the strength of our program in, presenting, making people aware, creating the space, and then supporting them in a more intimate environment. Are you looking forward to that as well? I know we've talked previously about that, and that's one of the areas that you were interested in.
Oh, very much so, Kady. And particularly the dads groups. And like we were saying, I think it's on us to create the space. And that's been the challenge I've had to our local management and leadership up in Cairns, is that we need to create the space. And because yes, we are in projects where delivering infrastructure, and but it's about how we pause that, in an appropriate way, and just allow that time. And it'll take time for people to get used to stopping and feeling that that's okay, and then to have the chat. So, I talked earlier about how it was wonderful seeing when someone starts opening up. It's amazing what other stories come about. And so, one of our strategies is in some of these dads groups is to have a dad from our leadership team to sit down and start showing his own vulnerability and sharing some of his worries, some of his concerns. Oh my goodness, I don't know how to help with that homework. My child is being bullied at school. I do hear that a lot as I travel around, and the absolute, heartbreaking worry that our folk suffer. And so to have some of those discussions, and that's what they've already started, that others, just start opening that little crack and have a bit of a go. So that's what I'm really, really hoping and praying for our own fellows that work with us. And yes, they can do that over Smoko, so you build that in to your usual day's activities. Do that as part of your pre-starts of a morning. So we're just looking at how can we be a bit creative so that it looks like it's just part of the habit, and building that in. And even if they don't chat about anything but footy for a while, they're at least just enjoying each other's company and supporting each other just in the chat.
And that's really creating that space for them to sit and share and learn from each other, a secure space. And it's amazing how when one person does share that vulnerability, others join in and do the same. Last week, we were at a John Holland lunch and learn that we also work with John Holland, and they've said the Working Families program has been an absolute game changer for them. And our presenters shared parts of their lives, and very quickly the group that were there, the participants, jumped in as well and shared parts of their lives. So it's amazing how it becomes quite contagious. We've already got it, ready to go, and we're just waiting for the opening to be able to do that. And it's so healing, such a therapeutic thing. James, do you have any thoughts on that dads group support and sharing and creating that space?
Yeah, I'm loving hearing what I'm hearing. Kym, I'm really excited to hear about your workplace and what's happening there. What we do know is that our family lives are an incredible source of meaning and purpose. And so if we can help people to open up about that, help fathers to talk about that as a part of their life, that they can feel that is a source of motivation and energy towards the challenges in life, including work. And so it's actually something to be tapped into. And it's certainly speaking of our men, it's certainly beneficial to their mental well-being to have opportunity to talk about something. To me, this is the great leveler. We hear all these stories about men don't talk and they don't share their feelings. Oh, it's rubbish. You know, I've sat in the room for many years now, and the great leveler is you get a man to talk about his kids and his worry about his kids, and the emotions there, the passions there, and it's what really makes life tick for them. And when we can let them talk about it, it really helps them to feel a part of this workforce that they are in and really support it. So yeah, thank you to Kym and Katie, though. I enjoyed hearing about some of the things that are happening in some of those workplaces too. That was great.
And can I say, Katie, sorry to jump in there as well. Something for those that aren't just fathers, some of our men, we've also been saying, you know, you are role models in your community. You know, your coaches, your uncles, you know, your brothers, whatever that might be. So it's I really think from the program, the skills that you do develop in just even hearing either the stories or some of the resources that the Fathering Project offers, can just be utilised in so many different ways. You don't just have to be a father, but it can certainly be a male role model. And, you know, we know our society is just crying out for those wonderful male role models. And then we can see that can then translate into, you know, we have a lot of apprentices and we have a lot of trainees and we have a lot of young folk that also come in through our organisation. So I can see those skills can also be quite transferable without them being patronising to some of our young folk as well. So yeah, it's really encouraging to, you know, almost start that ripple. It's not, yeah, just everyone start that ripple and having wonderful role models out there in the community.
Kym, thank you for sharing your experience. It's really excellent to know that there are workplaces like yours who are leading the way in shifting their culture to ensure that mental health and well-being is a top priority for their staff, whether they're fathers, mothers, or, as you say, role models, father figures or mother figures. Because without realizing, many of us are role models for younger people around us, and we don't even realize it. So thank you so much for that. Now, just conscious of time, and we've got a few questions that have come up, if that's all right. So I might just, you know, jump into the questions very quickly. We've got one for you, James, from Jason. Most workplaces have become pretty flexible post-COVID, my workplace included. However, I've noticed staff still seem pretty burnt out and generally stressed and not sure how to address it or help.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I think we need to appreciate that in our society, there is still a little bit of a post effect of the pandemic going on. And we've talked about this in a number of different forums. And when I say we, people, you know, in the mental health space, that there is still this lingering effect. That people are still feeling exhausted by what was 2 years or more of very incredible impacts upon their working lives. And so that's one comment. And then the other comment would be to say, and you notice that I'm speaking very systemically here, because that's a lot of the way that I think about mental health, and that we also need to acknowledge that there has been significant pressures on people. I hate to use the terms that the politicians have been throwing around so readily about cost of living and you know, mortgage pressure, and things like that. But we must acknowledge those things, again, we are not able to separate ourselves out and just be at work and just be at home. That's not how we as organisms work. And so I'd say to you, Jason, that people are coming to work and they're bringing some of this underlying stuff with them. What the solution to that is probably a bit bigger than me. You know, certainly we can do as much as we can in our workplaces to provide supports, and look at things that we can do organisationally to assist us all through this period. But also we need to be looking to those that are able to make some of the changes and able to help with some of those issues. We really need to be advocating for that. We really need to be pressuring, you know, governments, etc., to be thinking about, you know, doing more than just words around some of these things, because we know that these social determinants that we call them, of financial pressures, house pressures, living pressures, etc., we know that they are the major contributors to mental health difficulties, and we must appreciate that. I hope that's helpful in that response.
Thank you very much. Thank you, James. This one is for Kym. I'm a diversity and inclusion manager, but often find it difficult to have any sort of program assistance specific to men approved by the leadership team. Any tips here, please?
Oh, I'm hearing you, whoever's asked that question, because it is trendy, shall I say? Oh, certainly. I mean, we are looking to create inclusive and diverse workplaces, and people's brains seem to go straight to gender, to some of our culturally some of our minority groups, and I even know in our own workplace I've had to be really conscious and be very sensitive to the fact that it's not like we're excluding men and leaving them behind, because they're obviously front and center with everybody else in terms of your workplace and the success. So it has been interesting. I've had to even putting a business case forward as to why I was partnering with the Fathering Project. And particularly because I am from a government agency, I had to make sure I was spending taxpayers' money in a very appropriate way. It was very much, how did you advocate for that? And for me, it was about for all our people, and it was particularly for, and it was around that mental health. That and I don't think there is any secret anywhere, and any executive leadership team that can ignore that mental health is absolutely critical for our people, and anything that we can do to encourage that or to assist keeping people mentally healthy and really resilient. And so I would suggest that you sort of leverage off the fact that we want everyone in our workplace to feel safe, to feel healthy, and also to say that we very much need to support everyone, and that includes our men. So I know that's not a really good answer, but that was certainly the strategy from my perspective, was that it's for everybody. But I also don't want to leave our men behind, because we have had some women-specific strategies in terms of encouraging their development. And but I also, because I am in the construction industry, have been able to leverage off some of those dreadful and distressing statistics, that this is just critical and it's a no-brainer.
And especially in construction company, as you're saying, that has the culture is generally very demanding, both mentally and physically. You have to look out for everyone, and it's not one general program that will look after everyone. You might have to look at individual, specific, customized programs, and that's what this one is.
Definitely, and very much, and make it quite intentional. Like, there's no, you don't hold back from that. And our people are our biggest asset. We all know that in our companies, and we need to keep them well and motivated, because without that, we're not productive anyway. So it's a good value proposition, shall we say, for our organisations, if we need to speak to the accountants.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've got another interesting question for both or either one of you. The 4-day work week. So, most studies, if not all, show that it's had minimal to no impact on workplaces and had positive impacts on productivity. So why is there so much resistance? Won't everyone win with a 4-day work week, especially families? So James, can you go first on that one, please?
Well, first of all, the person that's posted that question is correct. Evidence is very clear on this as being beneficial. So that's not at all the conundrum. Part of the difficulty, though, is, if you can appreciate that, it's hard to apply this idea to all. If you think of things like shift workers, low-skilled workers, people casually employed, people in certain sectors, the dilemma is that a lot of policymakers are sort of, troubled by if we offer this, then it needs to be equitable. We need to be able to provide something that can benefit any person that is needing some flexibility. And so that's probably where the stalling is around that. Is also something to consider as well. And this goes back to that job design point, that we also know in some of the research that's been done, it's not just about it being 4 days. It's about this idea that modern work is different. Modern work is no longer predominantly assembly line work. Modern work is often, we talk about gigs or pieces of work or portfolios of work. Modern work is usually things like a project that gets taken through to completion, which means that some people could do that in many different ways. They could work their life schedule around that in many different ways that may not look like 4 days of work. It might look like 2 days and a different break of a day, and then a morning here and a morning there. And that concept is really just, if you can appreciate our organizations who have been doing things for a particular way for a particular time, that's just really hard at the moment for people that are managing things like workflows to get their head around how do we do that equitably. And I think that's where a lot of the stalling is. And when I say stalling, I don't mean purposeful stalling. I'm not trying to say that there's some sort of manipulative element to that. I'm just saying that that's where the progress seems to be sort of stopped at the moment, while people in this space really explore all the variances of how do we go about this in an equitable way. But certainly for smaller organizations, it's been easier because they can institute a model that works for most. And that's where we're seeing a bit of progress in this area, because an organization who have employees that do things mostly one way, they can put something in place like this and have benefit from it. And that's certainly who are the pioneers of this stuff at the moment.
Great. Thank you, James. Kym, have you considered the 4-day work week? Would you be able to do it?
It's an interesting one, and a bit to what James was saying in terms of equitable is where we get have a bit of difficult conversation at the moment. And so I suppose I would widen it to being flexible. So it's then about how do we, and when I say about equitable, because we've got field staff, across that 1,350 folk, we've got field staff, probably about 60% of our folk are field, and then we've got, then we've also got some offered, and then we've got some mix. And so it's how do we create those opportunities and flexibility, and to be able to have the best employee experience they can have when you are in the field and you are delivering a project within particular confined scope and timeframes. And so moving the conversation that we've had, particularly in our leadership team of More Late, is then about how do we provide the flexibility that people, if they do need to have some time off, or they do want to go be around for when their kids, we've got this happening right now with everyone graduating, all our year 12s. So many of our folk want to be around for when that happens. And so how do we try and shift some schedules around? How do we shift some crews around? These are the people out there in the field to help make that happen. So it's not purely at the moment a 4-day week as such. We're at the moment starting the conversation about how do we make it a 5-day week, because it seems to be, and particularly, and I do say in our construction, and not the built construction is quite, shall I say, a static location, whereas we're dispersed throughout all of Queensland, and I'm sure there's many companies experiencing the same. It's just at least having it such that there is this culture and this expectation that you're not going to work weekends. This is where we're starting. Like, we've got to start somewhere, and so that you at least are confining it. You're not planning to work over weekends. You're planning to at least confine it to 5 days. We've got some interesting conversation about our 10 on and 4 off at the moment, because we've got to drive distances, often, 1,000 of kilometres to get to particular locations. So how do we do that in a productive manner? We're looking at, do we fly people in? There are different creative, innovative ways. So we're not at the 4-day work week yet. However, I must admit, the whole concept and the principle behind it is something that we're really looking at, how we can instill that within our organisation and still stay in business.
Yeah, that's the important thing, isn't it? We do have to stay in business, and we look forward to hearing about how you progress that, Kym. Thank you very much. That wraps up today's session. I'm conscious it's already past 1. So once again, a big thank you to James and Kym for joining us. If this webinar's triggered some questions for you and you're wondering how you can better support your team, our partnerships team will be happy to discuss anything further with you, whether it's providing some further resources on wellbeing or more information on our Working Families program. Head to our website. We are here to help. So thank you again for joining us today, and I hope you found it insightful. I certainly did, and look forward to seeing you next time we have one of these. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.